That very Christmas, my sister pushed me down the stairs. Even now, months later, I still remember how time seemed to stand still for a moment, as if a silence hung in the air, thick and viscous, and only my body fell, powerless, heavy, as if filled with lead. I hit the floor with such a dull thud that even the air was knocked from my lungs, and I didn't immediately understand what had happened. And then I heard a crunch, a crisp, vile sound, like someone snapping a dry tree branch nearby. I heard it before I felt the pain, and there really was something akin to mercy in it, because the next second brought such a flash of pain that the world before my eyes wavered and began to blur, as if from heat. A wave of pain shot from my wrist to my shoulder, like fire coursing through my veins, and I lay at the foot of the stairs, gasping for breath, trying to sit up without screaming. The air was thick, smelling of roasting meat, candle wax, and pine needles, all of it a mocking reminder that today was Christmas, a day when everyone should be happy. And from above, on the top step, came her laughter, ringing, nervous, not at all remorseful, and then, almost immediately, my mother's voice, cold and irritated. "You're always so dramatic." That was all she said, while I sat there, clutching my broken wrist to my chest, afraid to move for fear of losing consciousness. No one rushed down, no one asked if I was breathing or if I needed help, they just stood and watched. My father said something like, "You should have been more careful," and my little brother giggled, looking at me with something almost like delight, as if I'd just performed a stunt from a cartoon. "That was awesome," he said. I didn't say a word. Slowly, one glance at a time, I stood up. The world was spinning, my leg was wobbly, but I still made it to my room. There, almost without thinking, I grabbed my laptop, my charger, everything I could fit into my bag with one hand. My shoulder was burning, my fingers were shaking, but I didn't let myself cry. I simply picked up my bag with my good hand, walked downstairs, and, without looking back, walked out the front door. No one stopped me, no one even asked where I was going. Let me rewind. This is important, because if you start with just the fall, you might think it was an accident, just a fluke, an unfortunate misunderstanding. But no, it was the finale, the end of what I'd been building my entire life, piece by piece, hoping that one day it would all fall into place. I spent 8 hours in the kitchen that day, a full Christmas dinner, roasted chicken with herbs, 3 side dishes, a homemade dessert, creamy, light, and cinnamon flavored. I washed the floors, folded the napkins, lit the candles, set the table, all by myself, because they said they were too busy. Mom with her freelance assignments, saying they were on a tight deadline. Dad was busy with bills, immersed in paperwork, and my sister, Violetta, was studying for an exam, or so she said, although I haven't seen her open a single textbook in the past 2 years. They simply said, "Cook." They didn't ask, they commanded, and, of course, I agreed, because somewhere deep inside, a foolish, childish hope still glimmered. Maybe this year they'd notice, say thank you, sit down at the table, and, if only for a second, look at me like I mattered. But everything turned out as usual. Father entered first, looked at the table, and with a wry smile said, "Too much, don't you think?" Mom followed, poked a fork into the dish, and asked, "Why is the filling cold?" And Violetta, with her eternal condescending smile, said, "Well, at least it smells like effort." And in that moment, I realized, everything I do, everything I put in, doesn't matter. I told them I'd just grab some napkins before we sat down. They were upstairs, in the hallway closet. I went up the stairs, she followed. "You're always in the way," she muttered. "I'll just be a second," I replied, without turning around. "You always say that," she said. And at that moment, I felt her hands on my back. It wasn't a playful push, not a casual movement, just a push, direct, confident, with some kind of cold intent, and that was it. I started to fall. I didn't scream, maybe that was my mistake. It was as if they didn't even realize what had happened until they saw me on the floor. "Jesus," my brother said, "did you just fall?" "No," Violetta replied, glancing down, "she's just getting attention." Mom leaned over the railing, sighed, and said, "Can we not do this now?" I drove to the hospital alone, calling an Uber, thinking about nothing but passing out from the pain. I held my wrist the entire way, as if it would shatter if I let go for even a second. My breathing was short and ragged, as if I was afraid to inhale too deeply, the pain would become unbearable. The driver asked if I needed help, but I just shook my head, looking out the window where a few snowflakes settled on the glass and melted, leaving behind traces like wrinkles on my face. The emergency room smelled of antiseptic and someone else's fear. I sat on a hard chair while a nurse, young and tired, typed something into her computer, and I kept wanting to ask, "Have you ever fallen so hard you hurt a bone break?" But I remained silent. When the doctor finally looked at the scan, he said calmly, almost without emotion, "A fracture, a hairline crack, but not displaced, no surgery is required, just a splint and rest." I nodded. The nurse, wrapping my arm in plaster, asked, "What happened?" And without even thinking, I lied. I said I slipped on the stairs, was in a hurry, and had a bad fall. The words sounded familiar, almost rehearsed, as if I'd made similar excuses dozens of times before, to others, to myself, to this whole world where complaining is not customary. When it was all over, I went outside, breathed in the cold air, called another driver, and went not home but to a motel on the outskirts of town. I paid cash, as if I was afraid someone would find me by following my credit card. The room smelled of dust, old carpet, and something sweet, but I didn't turn on the light. I simply lay down on the bed, still wearing my coat, and stared at the ceiling for a long time. Where the street light outside cast shadows, my arm ached, but I didn't even apply ice. I simply lay there and thought about the food left untouched on the table, the candles that burned out before anyone had touched dinner, the plates where the chicken was cooling, the things I'd been preparing for that day, as if it could change anything. Later, when the darkness grew thicker, I opened my laptop. The screen was blinding, but a file was already waiting in my email, prepared in advance, like an escape plan. I clicked the link, looked at it, and smiled for the first time that day, briefly, quietly, like someone who'd finally made up their mind. 3 days later, they received a letter. It came to each of them, mother, father, sister. When they opened it, they turned pale, just as I expected. When people say it wasn't always like this, they usually mean that everything deteriorated over time, but in our house, that's not true. It's always been like this. My first memory of Violetta is of a comb and a bald head. I was 4, she was 6. She said she was playing at a beauty salon and I was to be her first client. I believed her, because back then, I still believed everything she said. By the time Mom walked into the bathroom, the floor was strewn with my curls, and everything looked like a crime scene for dolls. I sat on the toilet lid and sobbed, feeling the air tremble with shame and pain. Violetta stood nearby, bored and unperturbed, scissors in hand. Mom looked at me and said, "Don't be so small, Maya." That phrase, like a scar, stayed with me my whole life. Don't overdramatize, don't be difficult, don't ruin everything. From then on, I knew that any tears on my part were a crime, any resistance a guilt. Violetta was allowed to do whatever she wanted. I saw it again and again. When she once threw a heel at me, not figuratively, but literally, I ended up with a bruise on my temple, and my father only sighed heavily. "Girls, you need to learn to get along." Only it wasn't a fight, it was an attack. I stood there with bleeding skin, and she smiled, and I said nothing, because I knew it was useless. The only time I dared to do anything was when I was 13. I showed the teacher my hands, scratched up to the elbows, and quietly said that my sister had done it. The teacher frowned and promised to look into it, and that evening, my parents interrogated me. We were sitting in the living room, the light blazing in my eyes, my mother crying, my father speaking slowly, but so that every word pierced me like a needle. "You want to ruin her future? With a track record like that, she'll never get into college. We're your family, Maya, and you're trying to tear us apart." And then my mother hit me, once, the first and only time. She burst into tears immediately, as if she were terrified of what she'd done, and said she was simply afraid for Violetta. I believed her then. Later, I realized she was afraid someone would ask questions. After that incident, I went silent, not because I was forbidden, but because no one asked anymore. We lived at my grandmother's house, technically, at her house. When I was little, she still lived there, in her room off the hallway, which always smelled of lavender and pencil shavings. She was the only one who ever stood by my side. When Violetta once pushed me so hard that my chin hit the table and I bled, Mom asked me what I'd done to provoke her, and Grandma said quietly but firmly, "She's 10, stop blaming her for simply existing." I loved Grandma's room. She let me stay there when I was sick, brewed tea with honey and lemon, traced the freckles on my arm with her finger and said they looked like constellations. She called me her North Star. I think she knew everything. She never said it outright, but she knew. When I was 14, my grandmother was transferred to a nursing home. Back then, it was called medical reasons, the doctors said, and my mother repeated it, looking off to the side, avoiding my gaze, as if she knew she was lying. They claimed she needed special care, constant monitoring, professional nurses, but I knew the truth was different. My grandmother asked too many questions, she saw too much, guessed too much. Her soft voice, when she spoke to my mother, became an irritant, like a splinter under her skin. She didn't yell, didn't argue, just asked questions, simple, direct, honest. Why is Maya always alone, or why does she have bruises? It was enough to make her uncomfortable. A week later, my grandmother left, and her room, smelling of lavender and pencil shavings, suddenly became a locked museum that no one entered. She died 2 years later. I was 16 then. I remember her funeral primarily for the cold, the sharp, wicked wind that left my fingers numb even through my gloves. The rain fell slantingly, knocking down umbrellas and turning the ground underfoot to mush. Violetta stood nearby, wearing a short dress that looked more like a wide belt, constantly checking her reflection in the camera phone, adjusting her lipstick. My mother delivered the eulogy, and I remember not her intonation, but her words. She said the word inheritance 5 times, without mentioning me once. After the funeral, there was the reading of the will. We sat in the lawyer's office, like participants in a strange quiz show. Thick curtains, the smell of paper, leather chairs. Mom and Dad whispered, their voices merging into a dry rustle. Violetta sat with her nose buried in her phone, and only I looked at my hands, trying not to tremble. When the lawyer began reading, his voice was even and professional, as if he were speaking not about our lives but about something else entirely, the house. All the property, the furniture, the garden, everything was placed in a trust, not to be sold or divided until my younger brother, Leo, turned 25. After that, the house was to be divided equally among everyone, Mom, Dad, Violetta, Leo, and me. But there was one clause, a special one, highlighted in a separate paragraph, with my name written in black and white. If I could provide convincing evidence of abuse by Leo's 25th birthday, I would receive sole title to the house, and whoever mistreated me would lose their share and be forced to leave. There was silence. The sign outside the window could be heard creaking in the wind, and then Violetta laughed. Her laugh was short and sharp, like the sound of breaking glass. Wow, she said, Grandma's a real Disney villain, dishing out curses and rewards. Dad chuckled. Old age isn't fun, he said. I guess I got too caught up in TV shows. And Mom, without looking up, added, old women love drama, especially when they have favorites. I sat still, but everything inside me felt like it was clenching into a tight knot. She believed me, the only person who saw, who understood. Grandma knew, and now, even in death, she said it for me. Enough. The words weren't spoken out loud, but I heard them in every rustle, in every glance. Of course, the family didn't take it seriously. At first, they tried to pretend nothing had happened. For a whole month, everything was strangely calm. Violetta didn't raise a hand to me. Mom suddenly became attentive, and Dad once even asked if I wanted to go grocery shopping with him. It all seemed tacky and unreal, like a fake smile on a mannequin. I watched them like someone given a break before a storm. By spring, everything returned to normal. Violetta started making snide remarks again. Mom again delegated all the housework to me, and Dad chuckled at dinner when I was tired and forgot to bring the salt. One day, passing by me in the hallway, Violetta abruptly bumped into me with her shoulder, pushing me into the wall. You're in my way, she snapped. Mom immediately appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel, and said in an even voice, girls, not today, please, don't hit your sister, not today. She said it as if tomorrow was okay. At 17, I got my first job, as a cashier at a grocery store. 3 buses each way, 6 hours on my feet, the smell of cheap coffee, and the metallic jingle of coins. I'd return home late, exhausted beyond words, but as soon as I got my first paycheck, my father said, since you're earning money now, it's time to contribute. So I started paying rent, for a room in a house where no one loved me. Violetta, of course, didn't pay. Leo didn't either, only me, but I put aside at least a little, coin after coin, bill after bill, like a squirrel hiding nuts before winter. not knowing if it will survive. I began to observe, detachedly, coldly, like a researcher. I noticed that Violetta always became especially angry when we were alone, that Mom only yelled when the doors were tightly closed, that any word I said, even a whisper, was considered drama. So I bought a camera, a cheap one, but with a motion sensor, connected to my laptop. I installed it above the stairs, then in the kitchen, then in the hallway. They didn't notice a thing. I didn't know what I would do with these recordings. I just wanted the truth to exist somewhere, beyond my words, beyond their lies. Deep down, I knew, one day, it would all happen again, and when it did, I wouldn't sit alone at the foot of the stairs anymore, convincing myself it was all just in my head. The file had no name, just a date and time, but I knew this was the beginning. I sat on the edge of the motel bed, still wearing the same jeans I'd worn that awful Christmas Eve, missing a sock. My wrist throbbing in time with my heart, as if reminding me of every day I'd lived in this house, and pressed a button on my laptop. No ceremony, no celebration, no popcorn, no nervous anticipation, just the dim light of the lamp, the smell of an old carpet, dusty and soaked with years of someone's cheap perfume, and a fist-sized lump in my throat that made it hard to breathe. A scene came to life on the screen. The hallway upstairs, lit by the soft evening light, seemed almost serene. There I was, halfway to the linen closet, so stupid, even the video showed my rush, as if help still mattered, and behind me, Violetta, close, too close, like a predator ready to pounce. I zoomed in, and her face filled the screen, bored, irritated, impatient, as if the very act of my breathing disturbed her peace. She muttered something, rolled her eyes, as she always did when I opened my mouth, and a second later, movement, simple, confident, without a shadow of hesitation, two hands, not angry, not furious, just mechanically sure, pushing me in the back. And I fell, without a sound, without a scream, without an attempt to resist, as if my body had accepted what was about to happen. I watched as my arms flapped in the air, as my foot slid down the wooden step, as I rolled, flipping, down, blow after blow, until I found myself on the floor, my hand at an unnatural angle, a broken plate nearby, a white blur of shards, like a bad omen. And then a sound, Leo's voice, surprised, as if he'd seen something funny. "Oh, my God," he said, "did you just fall?" And Violetta, quickly, sharply, with that familiar note of contempt in her voice. "No." And then Mom's voice, dry, icy, even, like a knife blade. "Can we not do this now?" I paused the video, the screen froze. I was lying motionless, small, helpless, at the bottom of the stairs, and they were standing over me. I stared at that image for a long time, feeling nothing and yet feeling everything at the same time: pain, humiliation, rage, fatigue, everything at once, but most of all, emptiness, because it wasn't the impact itself, not the pain, not the way bones snapped under my skin. It was that no one flinched, no one rushed, no one asked, "Are you okay?" I watched the footage again, more slowly, Mom with her phone in hand, Dad smirking to the side, brother snorting as if it were a joke. It all seemed so ordinary, so normal, as if it were part of the evening routine. That's what truly destroyed me, not the violence, but its normality. The only difference was that now I had proof. The next morning, I left the motel, ordered another Uber, clutching my bag to my chest, and asked him to take me to Eduardo's. We hadn't seen each other for many months, but I knew that if there was anyone in the world you could just be with without explaining yourself, it was her. Eduardo had once lived 2 houses away from us, as a child, and moved out as soon as she turned 18. She never looked back. I always thought she was smart. When I knocked on the door, she opened almost immediately, in a fluffy robe, with a spoon in her teeth, and her hair disheveled. Seeing me, she blinked and said with a raised eyebrow, "Maya? Oh my God, are you okay?" I swallowed, trying not to cry, and replied, "I just need a place to stay for the night." She didn't ask a single unnecessary question. She just opened the door wider and said, "I have some waffles, the kind you get in a toaster, not great, but hot." And I smiled for the first time in days, a small, tired smile, but real. By noon, I was sitting in the emergency room waiting room, signing paperwork with my left hand while my right, encased in a splint, ached and throbbed. Nurses flitted past, no one asking questions, no how, no why, no who. I received a copy of the report, a dry, impersonal sheet of paper, but for me it felt like armor, official confirmation that the pain had existed. By 2 o'clock, I was standing outside the police station. I was wearing an old sweatshirt, and in my jacket pocket, a flash drive. I stood there, looking at the sign, thinking that maybe this was all too much, that maybe I'd gone too far, that this was all just another drama, like they always said. But then I remembered my mom standing at the top of the stairs and saying, "You're always so dramatic," and walking in. The officer behind the desk looked like he wanted to be anywhere but there. He didn't even take off his headphones when I approached. I gave my name, handed over my ID, medical report, and flash drive. He reviewed the footage once, silently, then typed something into the computer and gave me a case number. "Someone will contact you," he said. I don't know if he cared about any of what he saw. I don't think so, but it didn't matter. What mattered was the paper, the trail, the recording, proof that this wasn't a figment of my imagination, not just dramatic. Now they couldn't say nothing happened. The next day, waking up with a heaviness in my body and a strange, almost icy clarity in my head, I dialed the number I'd written down on a napkin the day before. Alvise Tomazzini, a civil lawyer. He'd been recommended on a forum where women shared stories of family litigation and wills. I knew it would be expensive, but not impossible. I had those same savings I'd saved for years, little bills saved from shifts at the diner, money my parents never knew about because I always let them think I spent it all on food, clothes, or trinkets. Funny how it was the secret money, which had once seemed like a mere drop of freedom, that ultimately became my salvation. Alvise met me in a tiny office downtown, a place where the smell of paper, coffee, and dust mingled with a sense of discreet confidence. Through the glass partition, I could see the streets streaming with rain, and he looked like a tired man, sustained solely by black coffee and a fighting spirit. His tie was carelessly tied and clashed with his shirt, but there was something honest, something alive in this discrepancy. At first, he didn't take me seriously. I could tell by his gaze, his slight half-smile, and the way he asked if I was exaggerating. But when I pulled out the flash drive and the will, when I showed him the section where my name was mentioned, he raised an eyebrow, then inserted the flash drive into his laptop and, after watching the video, stopped talking altogether. A thick, ringing silence hung over him, like the air before a thunderstorm. When the video ended, he took a deep breath and said quietly, almost in a whisper, "They're laughing." "I know," I replied. He nodded, as if a string of legal formulas were forming in his head. "The sound might be a problem," he said, "but the picture is clear. It's intent, negligence, possibly even endangerment. If the will is written as you say, we have grounds." He flipped through the papers, stopping at the relevant lines, then leaned back in his chair, looked at me, and said, "We'll send them a letter." They received it the very next morning. I know because my phone literally exploded. 23 missed calls, 5 voicemails, 12 text messages, from my mother, a dry, controlled voice, full of reproach. "This is ridiculous, Maya, we haven't done anything wrong. Is this how you treat family?" From my father, a condescending tone, as if I were a child pouting over a trifle. "We're family, we can sort this out among ourselves. Family doesn't sue family." From Violetta, cold fury, mixed with mockery. "You wanted this, right? You set me up. Who even puts cameras in their own home? You're sick." And from Leo, the youngest, once the most innocent, now a stranger. "You made mom cry. You're so selfish." I turned off the phone. At first I simply couldn't listen anymore. Then I realized that in this silence, for the first time, I felt calm. That evening, Alvise called. "They hired a lawyer," he said. "Of course," I replied, looking out the window, where thin streams of rain were crawling down the glass. Below, a woman in a red coat was arguing with her dog, who refused to go any further. This simple, ordinary moment suddenly seemed unbearably alive to me. "They deny everything," he continued. "They say it was an accident, that the video was taken out of context, that you staged the whole thing to get the house." I remained silent, not because I didn't know what to say, but because any words would have seemed superfluous. "They claim," he added, "that the recording violates privacy laws, that they'll charge you compensation for using the camera without their knowledge." I pulled back the curtain and looked out at the city. The rain had gotten heavier, the asphalt glistened like a mirror. "Let them try," I said quietly. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Aren't you afraid?" he asked. I grinned. No, and I wasn't afraid, this is something new for me. So, you're ready? Let them try, I repeated, more firmly. They wanted a war, fine, I already had the footage, my fall, their laughter, my mother's "don't be dramatic" as I lay at the bottom of the stairs, my wrist bent at an awkward angle, and now these people, who had taught me to remain silent my entire life, were trying to twist the story, turning me into a liar, threatening to sue me for daring to record their truth. I didn't argue, I simply sent Alvise a short message: let's escalate the situation. 5 minutes later, he called back. They're bluffing, he said calmly, we're all clear, even if the audio isn't admissible in court, the video speaks for itself, you don't have to explain anything, just file a civil motion and attach the recording, let the image tell your story. And so we did. For the first time in years, my hands didn't shake as I signed. The next day, just as the gray morning was beginning to filter through the thin curtains, I heard a knock on the door, not my house, not my knock, it all felt alien, as if someone had invaded a space I hadn't yet called my sanctuary. It was them, my family, more accurately, family by blood, but no longer in kind. Technically, they weren't standing at my doorstep, but at Eduardo's, because I was still staying with her while she was on duty, and it was probably for the best that she wasn't home. My father spoke first, of course he did, his voice, booming and honed by years of domestic monologues, once again sounded as if he were chairing a meeting, not trying to justify a betrayal. We need to talk, he said, just talk. He said it in the tone teachers use at parent-teacher conferences, pretending to seek a compromise when in reality they've already made up their minds. I didn't move, I stood behind the glass door, holding my breath, and looked at them as if they were a group of strangers. Mom clasped her hands nervously, her slender fingers, always adorned with rings, now seemed somehow helpless. Violetta stood behind her, arms crossed, with an expression of irritated indifference, as if everything was tiring her. Leo, the one I once carried in my arms when he cried, was now standing slightly to the side, frowning, as if he were being punished for something he hadn't done. I didn't open the door. I think you're exaggerating, Dad said, raising his hands, palms up, as if trying to calm my invisible hysteria. You fell, accidents happen, right? I broke my wrist, I replied through the glass. You were in the way, Violetta snapped, rolling her eyes. Don't, I told her calmly, not here. Okay, listen, my father interjected, softening his voice to the clinging gentleness that always had an effect on my mother. This will destroy the whole family. Your sister just got accepted to university. You want to ruin everything because of one push? One. I chuckled, it's not just a push, it's a whole life of you treating me like trash. My mother raised her head, and for a moment I saw something flicker in her eyes, not remorse, no, but rather rage mixed with fear. We didn't come to fight, she said in a tense voice, we came to ask you to stop. You've already stated your point of view. My point of view? I almost laughed. It's not an opinion, Mom, it's a fact. You've embarrassed us, she snapped, you've turned this whole thing into some kind of drama. For pushing me down the stairs? I asked quietly. It wasn't like that. Violetta snapped. I have a video, I said, looking her straight in the eye. Leo stepped forward. Were you filming us? His face twisted. That's terrible, Maya, how could you? And you think pushing someone down the stairs is okay, but recording it on video is too much? I replied. No one said a word, only the rain pounded the awning, as if punctuating the pauses. You're doing this for the house, Violetta said suddenly, her voice ringing like a taut string. Admit it, you knew perfectly well what you were doing. I was cooking Christmas dinner when you pushed me, I said. If I were planning a scam, believe me, I would have chosen a day when I wouldn't have to stand over the stove for 6 hours. My father sighed, heavily, demonstratively, like a man tired of being reasonable. You've always been stubborn, Maya, but this is too much. It's not up to you to decide how much is too much, I said, not anymore. He frowned, trying to cover his irritation with his usual reasonable tone. Look, you're angry, fine, but now the lawyers are involved, you could lose, you could get in trouble because of that recording. Do you think your lawyer will defend you when things get bad? Things are already bad, I said quietly, you just never noticed. There was a silence. The same one I used to drown in at the dinner table, when everyone was deciding who I was and how I felt, and then Mom spoke again, softer, almost pitifully. You're not a victim, Maya. Then why are you here? I asked. They exchanged glances, but neither answered, and suddenly Violetta took a step forward. I didn't mean to push you, she said hesitantly, I was just trying to get through, you were standing in the middle of the stairs, I just pushed you. Didn't you push me? I interrupted, I fell, I broke my wrist, I wasn't making it up, and you all laughed. I wasn't laughing, Leo muttered, I just didn't know what to do. So that makes two of us, I said. My mother's voice wavered. Do you really want this to go public? Do you think the court will see you as some perfect little victim? I stared at her for a long moment. No, I finally said, but they'll see you perfectly well. I stepped away from the door. It's time for you to go. Please, my father said, his voice breaking for the first time, don't do this. You already did, I replied, my fingers trembled as I pressed the record button on my phone, just to preserve the sound of their silence, and then I turned away and walked deeper into the apartment without looking back. I didn't need to watch them go, I knew that sound, receding footsteps, quiet, persistent, like everything they did when they tried to erase me from their lives. Another 2 weeks passed, filled with silence, as if life itself had decided to pause, giving me time to process everything that had happened. I woke up in a new house, where every morning began with the soft crackle of old pipes and the smell of coffee brewed for one. It seemed to me that the walls still remembered their voices, whispers, fragments of phrases, but with each passing day they faded, giving way to the sounds of the present. Footsteps, the creaking of floorboards, the clink of a spoon against a cup, and then, on one of those gray, motionless days, Alvise called, his voice, habitually dry and tired, rang out like a bell. They offered a settlement, I didn't answer. The few seconds dragged on unbearably, until he continued, a complete transfer of the house, all tenant rights are terminated, they will move out within 30 days, forfeiting their shares in the trust and agreeing never to contact you again. I remained silent, my silence must have sounded like disbelief. To him, then he added, lowering his voice slightly, there is one condition, and I immediately understood what it was. If you drop the charges, he said, and agree not to publish the recording. I went to the window, the snow swirled again outside the glass, sparse and calm, like ashes settling on an old world that had finally burned out. I wondered if they were starting to pack up. Was Mom putting her porcelain cups in boxes? Was Violetta hiding her textbooks in her suitcase? Was Dad muttering something like, it's best for everyone? And yet, I asked, what if I refuse? Alvise sighed, then there will be criminal charges. Ellen said that if you continue with that video, your sister could face serious charges. It's not guaranteed, but it's possible. He paused, as if checking to see if I was breathing, and if you accept their offer, her guilt will be reduced to a misdemeanor, community service, no jail time, no criminal record, she can continue her education. I took a deep breath, feeling the air cut into my chest. Will she plead guilty? I asked. Yes, he answered quietly, it's on record, she admits she pushed you, it will be covered up, but it will remain on record, and the house will be yours, completely. I closed my eyes, this was it, the moment they couldn't even imagine, the day when the familiar balance would collapse, and the world would no longer revolve by their rules. They were used to me forgiving, to backing down, to everything being fixed with the phrase, we're family after all, but not this time, because they wanted forgiveness without consequences, and I'd lived with consequences my whole life, every bruise, every word, every don't exaggerate, it all settled inside me like layers of sediment at the bottom of a vessel. And now I was no longer going to be someone's repository of pain. They could have stopped this earlier, years ago, with one simple apology, but they didn't. I didn't smile, I couldn't, but my voice was even when I said, okay, we've reached an agreement. A week later, everything was settled. Violetta received 60 hours of community service, no jail time, no citations, she'll probably still get her diploma, and her life will continue almost unscathed. They handed over the house to me, signed the papers, moved out, and, as Alvise said, case closed. They even paid him his retainer, gritting their teeth, and emailed me a copy of the receipt, as cold proof that it had actually happened. And I stayed. I moved into the house that, for the first time in years, was rightfully mine. At first, it was strange, walking through the rooms where their voices had once echoed, feeling the air gradually clear. I washed the walls, repainted the kitchen, hung sheer curtains with a floral pattern, as if letting light in where only shadow had once reigned. I gave away the dishes my mother had left me, not out of spite, but because I didn't want anything that would remind me of the past. I found a job closer to home, not in a hurry, not out of need, but simply to get back into the swing of things. I bought myself a small Christmas tree, a funny one, in a pot, with tiny lights. I put it by the window. It was March, far from the holidays, but at that moment, that's exactly what I wanted, a start of my own. That evening, Eduardo came in with a bottle of wine and a box of pastries from the bakery next door. She took off her coat, sat on the windowsill, and asked, "Is it strange? Living here alone?" I thought for a moment. "It's quiet here," I finally said. "In a good way," she clarified. "In a good way," I nodded. We sat across from each other, listening to the wind scrape the roof, and I suddenly realized that silence might not be an enemy, but a friend. "And now what?" Eduardo asked, pouring more wine. I shrugged, cooking dinner, watching stupid movies, maybe relearning how to breathe. She smiled and raised her glass. "Then here's to freedom, Maya." I said nothing, just raised mine. We drank in silence, and this time, no one laughed, no one rolled their eyes, no one said I was too sensitive. There was only the house, quiet and mine, and the faint scent of vanilla, and for the first time in years, I felt like this was the end of something old and the beginning of something mine.